Market needs it and lower bills. Has the government pulled off the trifecta in reforming the energy sector? Australia joins the UN Human Rights Council, but should we even be there when our record on rights is in question? And Me Too, why hundreds of thousands of women are sharing their stories of sexual harassment and assault online. Joining me on the panel tonight, Maha Abdo from the Muslim Women's Association. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in and thanks for making it onto the set just with seconds to spare. Also, former Labor strategist, now chairman of the Campaigns and Communications Group, Bruce Hawker. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Karen Middleton from the Saturday Paper is in our Parliament House studios today, and in Melbourne, former Liberal advisor, now principal of Cormorant Policy Advice, Terry Barnes. Good to see you as well.
Thanks, Hamish.
As always, you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum and on Facebook as well. Well, they say that any plan is better than no plan. So is the federal government's new plan for the energy sector actually a winner? We're promised the new plan could save households between $100 to $150 a year from 2020. They've officially done away with the chief scientist's recommendation of a clean energy target, the CET. That's been replaced by a national energy guarantee, which includes ditching subsidies for renewables, but still provides a mechanism for incentivising lower emissions. It ensures energy is delivered to the market when we need it, and it should put downward pressure on bills.
For the first time, we'll level the playing field, end the subsidies, end the taxes, ensure that we have a genuinely technology-agnostic energy market that enables us to have energy that is affordable, reliable and responsible. That's what Labor should support.
Malcolm Turnbull says Labor should get on board, as you heard there, but you won't be surprised to learn they're not.
Does that mean that the so-called National Energy Guarantee has no guarantee, no modelling and no regulatory impact statement? What is the point of a National Energy Guarantee if the Prime Minister cannot guarantee that power prices will go down?
Well, interestingly, the chief scientist, Dr Finkel, says it's not a bad plan.
It covers a trajectory, encouragement of low emissions energy into the market, and the guaranteed ability, in fact an obligation on the system to deliver electricity when needed. Any policy scenario is much better than business as usual. Under business as usual, as you've seen, there's so much uncertainty, such a lack of confidence.
Well, the energy sector says that it needs certainty if we're going to see any real changes in power prices. So will we now see the end of the energy wars? Karen Middleton, let me start with you. Is that hoping a little too much?
Gee, thanks, Hamish. I think that's the big question, whether this delivers the certainty that business is looking for. It could be quite politically clever in some ways. It's left this open to the market, so they're not going to be subsidising renewables anymore, but they're making the point that the cost of renewable energy is coming down anyway. So the combination of these multiple guarantees that are going to be required, where there has to be a sort of lower price, but there also has to be an adherence to lower emissions. The government hopes, will encourage electricity providers to be going for the cheaper option anyway, and that may well be renewables. But is it going to be enough to increase investment? And that's what's going to bring the prices down. There's some question over this issue of modelling, whether there actually is any modelling or whether it's sort of an estimate. That language keeps changing.
And what are you hearing there? Is there any actual modelling behind this?
Well, every time people get asked, I saw the Treasurer doing an interview just a little while ago, and every time they're getting asked, they're sort of diverting, and it doesn't seem like there is any firm modelling, and there seem to be a number of options that were presented that could mean that the savings are a lot lower, and even $100 to $115 annually in 3 years' time over a period of 10 years, probably starting starting off at a lot less than that isn't really a huge amount. So the government is needing to say something about bringing prices down, because that is the real sensitivity here with Australians at the moment, is the cost of power. But what they're hoping is that there will be a transition over time to cheaper power, which conveniently will also, they hope, be renewables, and that the market will decide that it's not really willing to invest in coal-fired power into the future. And we've heard that message from energy providers anyway.
Terry Barnes, what's your take on this? $115 maybe in a few years' time. It doesn't make you feel like you're going to win the jackpot.
No, but if we're talking about the price of power not rising as fast as it has in real terms over the last 10 years, that is actually a good thing. And frankly, I think both households and businesses need certainty. I think it's important, though, to make sure that, and because the detail is so complex and it's still coming out, it's actually very hard to work out precisely how this is going to work. But effectively, I think it's good to have a balance between traditional sources of energy as part of a guarantee, coal, gas and hydro, but also I think we must accept that renewables have a part as well, so particularly solar and wind. So it would be a bit of a concern for me in the long term if renewables are not given the room to grow, to develop, and more particularly to come down in price and be affordable. And it'd certainly look at things such as battery storage. But on the other hand, to shut out traditional sources simply because some people don't like them because they're considered politically incorrect, like coal, I think is a mistake as well. So I think the government is trying to get the balance right.
Let me pick you up on that point then. Do you feel that this proposition strips some of the ideology out of what our policy settings are?
Well, I think politics and policy and ideology all go together.
But come on, give me a straight answer on this.
But look, I think at the end of the day, we need a secure energy supply. We need an affordable energy supply, but I do not think it should be restricted to traditional sources of energy. And I think we need to continue to grow and foster the renewable sector.
I'm not sure if that was a straight answer, but Maha, Abdo, let me ask you, do you feel any optimism based on what you're hearing today about the possibility in the longer term of some marginal reductions in the price of your power bill?
I mean, that's the most important thing, because I work a lot with homeless families and who are already struggling to get their power bills in order. And I think finding certainty in the fact that the prices will come down and that it'll be environmentally friendly, it's really important. But the most important thing is it's about the dollar. And how much can we afford?
Given how high they are currently,
it's very expensive.
And the promise is that maybe in a few years' time it'll come down $115. I mean, that's not enough to make a really significant difference, is it?
I think people need really the now, need to see what's going to happen now and to be showcased. What is it? How much are we going to be saving? So that it makes our job a lot easier as service providers, providing continuously emergency relief for those families that can't afford. I mean, whether it's winter or summer, it's just as bad. So I think we all have a responsibility to really have a platform for bringing back trust in energy prices.
Bruce Hawker, it's pretty clever politics, isn't it? I mean, it does sound like they're striking a balance between all of these competing interests.
There's an interesting sort of tap dance going on here, and I think that the short-term loser in it is probably Tony Abbott. And I suspect that a lot of this policy was developed around that.
Why is that?
Well, because I think that the Prime Minister has come up with a solution that doesn't include the clean energy target. So he can say to the Conservatives and the Liberal and National Party, well, I've delivered on that. Once again, people in the Labor Party will say he's capitulated to the Conservatives.
In fact, they are saying that.
Yep, and he's showing inauthenticity once again. His problem is that, as Maha pointed out, it's going to take some time to even see any results from this. In fact, it'll be a year after the next election before this scheme is introduced. So in the meantime, Labor can just go around taking potshots at it and say, well, it's, the price of a hamburger in a week that you're going to be better off, maybe, and it could even be worse, it could even be worse than that. It could go up. But prices have been going up, so if they can show in the longer term that there's something happening, that's fine. But my guess is that Tony Abbott will be smarting today, but in the longer term, I think that this will unravel.
Terry, I can see you're trying to get in there.
Well, I thought Tony Abbott was taking credit today for the clean energy target being dropped from 2020. But the other side of it...
Of course he will.
Yeah, but he changed his mind. He changed his mind and said there wasn't enough coal.
But the other side of this, I think, is the politics of it, how it plays out from here. And as Maha was pointing out, I mean, we're not going to see hard results for a couple of years. And Labor, if they're wanting to be the party, the party in waiting to be in government, they have to play it very carefully, because this could be their problem in 18 months or so. But the other thing is, if they obstruct it, particularly if legislation to back it has to go through the Parliament, they could become the villains in this very quickly.
Well, it's unclear as to whether that'll be the case. In fact, the early advice I think that the government was talking about was that it did not require legislation. The Parliament didn't have to deal with it. So this would be an executive decision, and the government would take responsibility for it from the outset. And I think that gives Labor a pretty clear run at it. And they can point to the problems that people in the renewable energy sector have with this, because, subsidies are going out, certainty is highly uncertain now, and there's a very big industry that's out there, $40 billion, 15,000 jobs created in renewable energy, all potentially in doubt.
So, Karen, is this clever politics by the Prime Minister? Has he neutered a problem, or actually just exposed his side of politics for a lot longer?
I think it's a bit hard to tell yet. I think certainty is the issue, and it's a confidence game, and what he is trying to do is create confidence around this policy, that the government knows what it's doing and that it has a plan to bring prices down. Then it hopes that as technology develops and battery storage improves, that renewable energy can become that dispatchable power, and that he can sort of solve all of his problems at once. But it does rely on people trusting that this is a plan that is going to work, and we don't know yet from business whether they're going to invest on this basis or not. And that's the only thing that's going to bring prices down is if there's a greater increase in supply.
Karen, it struck me today that part of the challenge for all sides of politics on this question is just communicating an effective argument. Listening to them, they seem so ill-equipped to actually deliver a clear and concise message around this issue.
Well, it's mind-bogglingly complex. They issued the committee that they'd set up, the council they set up, they issued the letter from them, and it was mind-bogglingly complex, I have to say. It took me hours wading through it to understand what it meant, and I thought, well, yeah, this is a difficulty for the government in communicating. That's why it's going for these three principles, affordability, reliability and responsibility, which is the issue about emissions reduction. There are those in the Tony Abbott camp who don't even give any credence to the responsibility bit, that they don't think that we should be adhering to the Paris targets at all. So they're going to criticise it on that basis, but at least they have put that up as the third pillar of this, that they are still trying to bring emissions down. We haven't seen the fine print on any of it yet, and we haven't seen particularly on how that emissions reduction is going to work, and whether that's going to be effective.
I have memories of John Hewson trying to explain the GST and the K, and when you have to explain, as Golda Meir once said, you've lost. Yeah, and that's the challenge for the government.
Better you than us, Karen Middleton.
Thanks.
But the thing, just quickly, is that gives me encouragement about it is that Alan Finkel, the chief scientist, endorsed it. And I think I trust Alan Finkel's judgment.
Yeah, OK. Well, we'll leave it at that for the moment. We've got other stuff to talk about this evening. Australia is copping criticism for joining a UN council to protect human rights globally. Our own record on the subject is being questioned by an international body looking at Australia's treatment of Indigenous Australians and refugees. But we joined the Human Rights Council along with the likes of Congo, Afghanistan, Nigeria and Qatar, all of which have appalling human rights records. So what is the point of a body like this if the member states don't even uphold the values they're supposed to stand for, monitor and foster?
We recognise its shortfalls, we recognise its failings, but we're prepared to be part of an effort to change it, along with the United States, who encouraged us to run in the first place for the Human Rights Council and is leading the charge on reforming the Council so that countries' appalling human rights records are subject to greater scrutiny and they are held accountable.
Well, the Foreign Minister clearly admits the shortfalls. Should Australia even be there, Maha?
Well, I think if we're already on the table, then we have to show responsibility and care and understand what our role is and what the purpose of the United Nations is at the moment. I think because, for a long time we've just taken a back seat and pointed the finger at other countries. I think it's about time that if we are a major player as Australia, then we must show how effective we are as part of applying the human rights
But
treaties.
can we do that with any credibility, do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't want to go backwards. I mean, we can talk about that for hours and days, and there's so much pain and there's so much trauma that we've caused others. But I think where I'm seeing that is that if there is a bit of light at the end of that tunnel, then why don't we shine that light on that and start looking at what can we do now to really create a space that we can acknowledge that we've done some really horrible things and we continue to do that. But before we pick on other countries, then start to look at our own backyard.
Terry Barnes, is there any point in even having a serious conversation with the likes of Qatar, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Congo on something like human rights?
Well, I think it's important that there are always conversations around the world on human rights, but frankly, I don't have a great deal of confidence in the ability of the Human Rights Council. If you look at the full list of membership, I mean, most of the members, I think it's about 47 odd, have a really appalling human rights record. So, but then again, if a country had to be perfect to be on this body, there would be no members, absolutely none. That includes the UK, that includes the US, it includes Australia. I noticed that Spain was elected at the same time as we've been. And of course, last week we saw police beating up citizens in the streets of Barcelona. So the world is not a perfect place, but I think bodies like this, I doubt their effectiveness anyway. They're really talk shops.
Karen Middleton, what's the view in Canberra about the benefits of Australia being on a body like this? Are we a leader?
I don't know if I'm going to speak on behalf of the whole of Canberra, but I think, look, if, there is an argument that being a country that has better standards of human rights than some of those other ones, that there's a good case for being there to try and elevate the other standards. I guess the question is about effectiveness. And if you look at those other countries that have put their hands up to join, and there are quotas from each part of the world, so that's why there are particular countries from different parts of the world. But if you look at those countries, if they were really terrified that they were going to be held up to the full blowtorch of scrutiny, would they really have put their hands up for it? So you do wonder how effective a body it is in the end. But Australia will also have to answer for its human rights record on refugees and on Indigenous people in particular. But it's overall probably got a better human rights record than many of those other countries.
But what version of soft power are we trying to project onto this? I mean, what is our view, do you think, of how you kind of use human rights to leverage an agenda?
Well, I think it was interesting that the Foreign Minister said that the United States had encouraged Australia to join. And the United States has been particularly critical in the last 24 hours about the Congo being allowed to join because of its human rights record. So the US is clearly suggesting that they think Australia can be a shining example on that committee on that council for other countries. But how practical that actually is. And every country has a different definition of what its priorities are in human rights. I mean, each country had to put forward a pledge for what it would do in human rights, and Australia's pledge was about gender equality, issues about good governance and freedom of expression. So they were the three principles Australia put forward. Other countries will have a different idea of where the priorities should be, so I'm sure they'll sit around the table and argue about that for starters.
Bruce, what's your view? What will Australia achieve by doing this?
It might get some cred with the United States. It might get itself into a position where it can leverage some influence on other UN member states when it wants to go for another committee, maybe when it tries to get back onto the onto the Security Council, which they are intending to try to be members of again. I frankly don't see a lot of value in it for the reasons that everybody else has enunciated. And really, Julie Bishop and others need to be a bit careful about what they wish for, because it will be a vehicle for people to say, oh, well, there you go, you talk about human rights, but what are you doing in Manus Island, or Manus, what are you doing in Nauru and so forth? They'll be that, and what are you doing to your own Indigenous population? So it will become in a sense, a cudgel that people who are critical of Australia's particular human rights record in areas to have a go at them. So I don't see a lot of positive stuff coming out of this for the government.
But can I say, I see that maybe it could be used as an incentive that we could be, try harder at looking at what's happening with that Indigenous community. Sure. What are we doing for refugees? I'd like to see that this could be a tool, hopefully, that we could look inside of ourselves and see how we can role model a better, human rights advocate.
All right. Well, let's talk about something that's happening online today. Me Too. That's what hundreds of thousands of women are posting on social media. Their own accounts of sexual harassment and assault. It's not easy reading and it's not meant to be. Look on Twitter, you'll find women revealing sexual assault by managers, for example. This woman said she was even harassed by colleagues afterwards. Some were attacked on the street. This woman said she was grabbed from behind as someone tried to pull her into a water drain. Others said they were subjected to unsolicited comments like smile baby, damn girl, that kind of thing, catcalling. Now, the social media campaign is in response to revelations that big-name actresses such as Angelina Jolie had kept quiet about their own experiences of alleged sexual harassment by the movie producer Harvey Weinstein. Politician Anne Ali asked the Q&A panel and audience overnight about their experiences.
I'd just like to ask everybody in the room here to please raise your hand if you've ever been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. Okay, so that is not okay.
It's a pretty incredible demonstration there. Karen, you've written about this sort of stuff happening in the halls of Parliament House. What does the Me Too message or slogan hope to achieve, do you think?
I think what you're seeing, Hamish, is there's a sense of safety in numbers now somehow, that this Harvey Weinstein story from Hollywood and the issue of the Donald Trump back of the bus conversation with Billy Bush a year ago, which was what prompted what I wrote 12 months ago this week, it means people, sort of women, come out of the woodwork and say, look, this has happened to me as well. You don't volunteer this stuff, you put it away somewhere in the back of your head and don't think about it until such time as there is a conversation about it, and then you add your voice to it and say, well, look, it actually is far more common than people might think. And that was the point of the piece I wrote 12 months ago. And when I did write that, people did come out of the woodwork, and I was being contacted by all kinds of women saying, yeah, here's what happened to me. You know, this is what happened when I was 8, when I was 15, when I was 27. You know, these stories were coming from everywhere. And I think there's a sense that women have parked them away and just had to get on with things, and now they're allowed to talk about it. And it's very common. I
wondered, Karen, as these messages and posts started appearing in my social media feeds overnight, what my female friends and colleagues wanted as a response.
Acknowledgement and maybe an understanding of consideration of behaviour. Sometimes men think they're being complimentary when it's actually intimidating. It's not always welcome. But I do know some of my male friends, when I wrote what I wrote a year ago, sort of said, oh golly, you know, now I'm worried about my own behaviour. But I do think deep down men know when they're being appropriate or inappropriate, and that's, I guess, the plea here. It's have a think about the behaviour and the culture that's created of acceptability around it, which was where that Donald Trump issue was last year. There was it's just a joke, it's boys having a laugh. Well, you're having a laugh at a woman's expense, and sometimes it gets a lot worse than that, and it's worth having a think about the whole culture around it.
Maha, some women, in fact, today have made the comment that it's one thing for people in the public eye, celebrities, journalists, whatever, to write and talk about this stuff. It might be a very different experience for someone outside of the public eye to come forward with a story like this. In the context of what we're talking about, Me Too, do you worry about some women who are perhaps, you know, kept away, hidden away, extremely vulnerable?
I mean, that's already happened. I've been in, a lot of women have been in touch with me via social media, via Messenger and other mediums, is to say, well, it's easier for these women to say, but it's harder for other women not to, and there's so much trauma that's being relived at the moment. So what are we doing about that? What are some of the consequences? I think it's a great social media campaign, but at the same time there has to be in parallel providing certain trauma counselling and support for those women that will be certain memories will be triggered by what they read of other women doing that, and those women that are already able and capable of speaking out and putting it on social media are already dealing with that, and there's a lot more hidden pain and trauma for these women that need a bit more time and therapy to be able to express where they've been at and to be able to acknowledge and own what happened.
Do you think there are subcultures, even different racial groups within Australia or religious groups for whom the women might find it much more difficult to come forward and talk about this stuff.
It's just not just the religious groups, but I think it's different parts of Australia, different part in New South Wales. You've got certain parts in Western Sydney. There are some women, it depends on where you're at, what sort of status you hold on social media or in the community, that you're able to talk about that. The feed, my social media feed has come up with so many women in various communities that are talking about that, but yet there's a lot more women who are sending private messages and saying, I wish I could say what you're saying. I've got now you're giving me more confidence, but I need help. Where do I go? So these are things that now we as service providers at the grassroots level, we have to be able to provide that in a professional, ethical manner.
And not necessarily equipped to do so, given the sort of
much.
tidal wave
now exactly the awareness is out there. It's not similar, but to how when we but we talked about domestic violence. Now we're talking about that sexual abuse, then what are we having in place to deal with those fallout?
Terry, how do you read and receive these messages that you're reading? You must also have seen a lot of it.
Yes, I have. And can I say, Hamish, I think actually sunlight is the best disinfectant of a nasty problem, whether it's a personal or a social one. And I think this campaign is where social media is doing good rather than bad for a change. And I think it's very sobering, particularly for men, I guess. But the thing that strikes me is that about harassment is that anybody who is in a power relationship with another person and abuses that is a harasser. And that increasingly, I think, and it might be controversial to say it, but as women more and more take over positions of power that men are traditionally held, it could actually go the other way around as well. It's when one individual dominates another to their advantage, and that is wrong. And look, back when I worked in Parliament House, I was harassed in a way by a prominent female politician. As a staffer, you can't talk back, you can't answer back, and it's frankly not a pleasant experience to be given or looked over like that. And I've always remembered it, and I've tried to treat women better as a result since.
Do you, Bruce, think that this is about gender or about power structures?
Well, I think it's largely about both. It is about power and gender, and I take what Terry says on board, but I think largely this is something where men have misused their positions of power, both physical and in the workplace. So, I was lucky to be brought up around strong women who left me in no doubt from when I was very young as to what was appropriate and inappropriate behaviour. And I think now the good thing about this campaign, this spontaneous campaign, is it's directing it at men, really. It's saying this is inappropriate behaviour, and I think women are just going to have to keep reminding men from now on forever that what is right and what's wrong.
I agree with that.
Karen, are you encouraged by some of the stuff you're hearing just in the conversation this afternoon?
Yeah, I think that's all correct. That it's, as I said, it's a cultural thing. There's just sometimes there's people don't stop and think about the impact of their behaviour, and this we're talking about harassing comments and pestering and intimidation more than the sexual assault and the dramatic end of the spectrum. That's of course in a different category entirely, but it's all related to the same culture, which is just this sort of it's okay to remark about a woman's appearance or a woman's intellect, or remarks that you might not make about a man. I know we're generalising, and yes, of course, harassment does happen to men as well, but I think Bruce is right. Mostly we're talking about women being subjected to it, and sunlight again is correct. Terry's correct. It's good to get it out and talked about, and for people to have the sense of just how frequent and just how common it is, and not just in politics, not just in Hollywood, but in everyday life, in the street, on the bus, in the shops, at home, everywhere. People are subjected to behaviour that makes them feel humiliated, and it would be good if there was less of it.
Absolutely.
We will leave it on that note. Karen, thank you very much for summing up and wrapping up perfectly. That's it for The Drum for tonight. Thanks to our panel, Maha, Abdo, Bruce Hawker, Karen Middleton in Canberra, and Terry Barnes. It's been